Welcome. Just before we get started today, I have a couple announcements as per usual. So we're done with social nights for the year. The next big event is the Game Jam, which is when the next social night was going to be anyways. So instead of that, we're having the Game Jam. That's on November 13th through the 11th. It'll start on 7 p.m. on that Friday. And it is 48 hours long, so make sure you have that weekend off. Or get all your homework done before or after. We'll give you guys more announcements and details on that as time comes up, but we just want to make sure you guys have the date and times. Again, if you want to show something off, let me know. We'll make time for it. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's game development related. And then again, if you want to pay dues, Sage is in the back. You can talk to her after the meeting. So, today, we're going to be talking about procedural generation. Just for some background, this is something that I do a lot with game development stuff, just because I like making sandbox-esque games, and those typically have a lot of procedural generation. And so, let me just start with what comes to mind when you hear the phrase procedural generation. I have some definitions, but if anybody wants to give me a answer, yeah?
Roguelikes?
Yeah, roguelikes use procedural generation quite often. I think mostly because it's usually indie developers that make it, but then that also makes it so it's not boring. Because if you had a roguelike that had a set stage every time, you'd get bored of it after a few attempts. Whereas with a roguelike that has procedural generation, the game's going to randomly generate the maps and the levels every time. So, yeah, roguelikes are a very good example. So the actual definition of procedural is a set of instructions that a computer follows. And for generation, I didn't really read any of that, I just kind of put it on the slides. But basically, procedural generation is where a computer has like an algorithm or something that it follows a bunch of steps, and it is random, but it's like set within the constraints of the person, the coder decides what it is. So it is random, but not entirely random. It's random to a point where it actually looks like something like a level or something. So let's hop over to the Kahoot. Okay, I'm going to start it. Procedural generation. Which of the following games do not use procedural generation?
Minecraft.
Yeah, if somebody picks Minecraft, then. All right, the answer is Super Mario Bros. 2. Borderlands 2 does use procedural generation. It doesn't use it for the levels and stuff like most typical games use. It actually uses it for the weapons. So every time you play the game, you're in, with the exception of like story-related weapons, most other weapons you get from enemies and stuff are randomly generated or procedurally generated. Okay. So, what other games come to mind? I had like Minecraft up there. Which is like probably the most popular one that uses procedural generation. But does anybody else know of any games that they've played that has procedural generation in it? Yes, Terraria. Terraria is a good example.
Don't Starve.
Don't Starve is also a good one. I'm going to talk about that later as well. Oops. All right, well, I'm going to go through a list of them and just kind of like explain how each game does that, but that's in a little bit. Let's hop through a couple more Kahoot questions. All right. What is a pro of procedural generation? What's something that's good about it? Yeah, infinite replayability is the best thing here. If you really like math, I guess lots of math is also good. And then what is a con of procedural generation? What's something that's not good? All right, so I kind of have to explain what it means. When it comes to procedural generation, it's really easy to make really big worlds. Like think Minecraft, the world is infinite, right? So you're able to come up with a lot of quantity, like a lot of stuff, because it goes on forever and ever. However, because of that, you're sacrificing a lot of quality to the game. Not saying that Minecraft isn't a quality game, but if you have like the map the size of, like say, like GTA 5, for example, the map in that game is going to have a lot more like intricate features and stuff. Like every part of it's going to be very unique because it wasn't like it was made by hand, pretty much. Whereas like Minecraft, a map of that size, it's going to be a lot of just like hills and stuff. You could have it auto-generate a bunch of buildings and things, but eventually they're going to repeat. So it's going to be less of a quality experience, and it's just easier to make a lot of stuff because it just randomly generates everything. So again, kind of have the list of stuff there, but like I said with the quantity, it's really easy to make a lot of stuff really fast. If you have a really small team, it's a lot easier just to code something that makes a bunch of hills over and over, as opposed to making a giant model, especially if you only have a team of a small amount of people. It's going to be really hard to accomplish. Infinite replayability is a good thing, especially with roguelikes, like I brought up earlier. You know, every time you play a roguelike, you're going to end up playing the game over and over, so you kind of need that replayability aspect, just so you don't, you know, you die and then you have to go through the whole thing again, and eventually that'll get boring. Whereas if it procedurally generates or randomly generates, you know, you're going to get a different experience every time. And then for the cons, like I said, less of quality and repetition as well. You know, you can only play Minecraft so many times before you start to like, yeah, the mountain is here, there's a different mountain, but like it looks slightly different, but that's about it. You know, it's just a mountain. And that can happen the same with a lot of games that are like, you know, you walk 10 miles and there's another mountain that looks very similar. So, and then the other thing is very hardware intensive. If a normal game like GTA again, it's just one map. They probably do chunk it and stuff, but all it has to do is load that file into the game, and it puts it in there for you, and it's there. Whereas with procedural generation, it's usually not there, so the computer has to do a bunch of math in real time as the player is playing the game. So if you have a lower end device, you may have to lower the render distance or something that would make it so you know, they don't get the same experience as somebody that has a better computer. But it's much more of a difference than a game that does not have procedural generation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some examples of just how different games have done procedural generation. And it'll probably be obvious as to what game it is based on these Kahoot questions. All right, what does Minecraft use procedural generation for, not including loot items and chests? Is this kind of a trick question? But we'll see. Yeah, not really. Yeah, so it uses it mostly for generating villages. The houses themselves aren't necessarily procedural. They're just like set structures that are placed throughout whatever, and then the game will use some randomness as well as some math and figure out where the paths should be, you know, leading to each house, stuff like that. Desert temples are just a set structure. Those don't ever change. You know, you go in one desert temple, it's the same as another one. And then player spawn placement, I would say it's procedural, but it's not generating anything, so. Okay. So Minecraft is probably the most popular, well, it is the most popular example of a procedurally generated game. The world is infinite, so it goes on forever. Everything about it for the most part. You know, the world's randomly generated, the villages, the new underground city things, those are, you know, all randomly generated as well. Everyone you encounter is going to be different. The way that they do it for the most part, I mean, they probably don't use purlin noise, but that is typically how most people make games similar to this. And all purlin noise is just a series of hills that are all random in varying like heights and weights. And then you can modify that to kind of generate those hills and mountains and such, add different scales and things. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Minecraft has maybe used that to start, but my guess is they switched to something that is more efficient, or they probably made something themselves. And then they also use definitely multi-threading. So because, like I said, it's hardware intensive, something they do to make it easier to run on devices is they have multiple threads. So they have the computer doing multiple things at once. So for instance, there's the computer is at one time, it's controlling the players, making them move around, while in the background it is also generating those chunks that the player is trying to move towards, so that it helps increase their experience. Here's just a picture of a map from the game. You can kind of see, you can kind of see hills a little bit, but it also uses procedural generation for biomes as well. I'm not totally sure how they do their biomes, but it's probably also another sort of noise that they can layer on top of that. Typically how a lot of games do it is they have like a temperature as well as like humidity and then like elevation, and they mix all three of those together. So for example, like the desert biome would be like a high temperature, low humidity. And so when they cross-reference those on top of each other, like this section all meets the criteria for a desert. Whereas with a mountain biome, for example, that has snow on it, there's going to be a high elevation and a like high humidity or something. It varies based on each biome. The reason why they do that though is just so that you don't have like a freezing cold mountain biome next to a desert, because then it doesn't really make much sense. Whereas at least this way, you know, there's a swamp in between, so it kind of makes sense for those to be next to each other in real life. Good question. True or false? Every part of Minecraft Dungeons is procedurally generated. So this is the dungeon crawler game that they made, not the actual Minecraft. So this is false. It does use a lot of procedural generation, but not every part of it is. They have, I'll talk about it actually here on the next slide. So it is procedurally generated for the most part, for going from each room to room. Sometimes hallways are randomly generated, sometimes rooms entirely. But how they do it for the most part is they make these things called landmark rooms. And these are a very specific room. Sometimes it's static, like it's already pre-made, or sometimes it is somewhat randomly generated, but it has like identifying features so that if you're going through a dungeon, you don't get totally lost. They want to have that so it doesn't like all look the same. So maybe, you know, you pass a statue of a Steve or something. So then when you're going back, or maybe going somewhere else, exploring somewhere else, you see it and you know where you're at, so you don't get totally lost and have everything look the same. It also uses some procedural generation for mob spawning, just so it knows, like if you're in a certain area and you have a certain item or something, it'll spawn specific mobs to kind of make the gameplay experience more interactive with how you're currently playing the game. Here's kind of a overview. It's really dark. I couldn't get a brighter picture. But it's, yeah, I don't know, I just had a picture. You can kind of see hallways and stuff. I think how it would usually work is you have like a room in here or something, it would have a landmark of some sort, and then you would have like the starting point, which would also be a landmark. And it has certain areas that it wants you to reach, and then everything else is just kind of filled in. So. All right, what kind of procedural generation does Terraria use? this one's going to be a guessing game. So yeah, I'm going to explain what all these are. Noise influxing, I made up, so that one's wrong. Cellular autonoma is, I'll talk about it. I have a couple of slides that kind of explain it here in a second. Flood filling is an algorithm just used to fill a space. It's not necessarily random. And then rapidly exploring random trees is a whole another deal, which Terraria does not use. So Terraria uses procedural generation to fill a finite world instead of an infinite world. So if you ever played the game before, you know it's a set map size. You can change it, large world, large, small, whatever. But it always follows the same format. And this kind of helps keep the gameplay familiar, but not necessarily like new every time you play the game. So if you play the game and you run into a jungle biome, you know that the dungeon's going to be on the other side of the map just because the game is always that way. Whereas in a game like Minecraft, you could run into like an ocean monument, and that doesn't mean anything about where you are in the world because of how it's generated. And the other difference is that because it's finite, the game can also be generated all at once. And that's where cellular autonoma kind of jumps in. Here's a map just kind of the whole world if you've ever seen the game before. But it has certain features that are always in certain spots. So the dungeon is typically, or is always on either the right side or the left side. And then on the opposite side, you're going to have the jungle as well. Typically, there's a desert or two that are spread throughout the world, as well as an ice biome. And those are more towards the middle, just because each of those biomes has a different level of difficulty. So the jungles is a little harder than the ice biome, for example. So the game strategically generates those on the outside towards the outside of the map, just so when the player reaches it, hopefully they are prepared for it. As well as they put hell, or whatever the biome's called, they put that all the way at the bottom, just because they don't want players reaching that until they're ready for it, although some people disregard those rules. So cellular autonoma is something that, I don't know if Conway's Game of Life was the first thing to use it, but the general premise is that it looks at each individual tile or pixel, and it will look at the adjacent cells around it, and it will determine what it's going to do. So in Conway's Game of Life, it has a set of rules where it says, like, it looks at this square, and it's like, okay, if there's 4 squares around me, then I die. It turns into nothing. Whereas if there's only like 1 square or something, it'll turn into something else. And that's kind of the general premise of how it works with Terraria. The only difference is it's not just black and white. Terraria, there are multiple types, but as it's generating the world, it uses a little bit of noise just to get things started, but then it'll go through each block. Take this triangle, for example. Originally, it's just a block of dirt, but then it looks at the adjacent blocks around it, and then it can use that information to determine what type of block it's going to be and make everything more smooth. It can also use this for different biome things, for when the corruption spreads, for example. It'll look at the corruption, look at the blocks around it, check if it's able to spread, and it does that throughout the game while you're playing. And the nice thing about cellular autonoma is that it just relies on the information around it. So if you want to, you can actually generate everything at once, which is how Terraria is able to generate a world in the matter of seconds, because it can use, probably uses compute shaders, but it uses some technology that's able to run a bunch of this stuff all at the same time, just so it goes lickety-split, so you're not there waiting forever for it to go through each block. Kahoot. True or false? Spelunky's inspiration was Spelunker. This is true. So there was a I don't remember what system it came out for. There was an older game called Spelunker, which was the main inspiration for Spelunky. It's pretty similar. Which leads to the follow-up question. Spelunker also had procedural generation, true or false? This one is false. And the reason for that, it could have had procedural generation. I don't think it did. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And if I am, then that's on me. But at the time, the game came out back in like the NES days. I don't know if it's on the NES, but it came around that time period. And like we had said earlier, procedural generation is very hardware taxing. So a game of that time period probably wasn't able to do something like this. But Spelunky is a lot newer game. So Spelunky does procedural generation a little different. This is way more structured than the previous examples. I don't know why I said pre-made levels. That's false. But it's semi-random. So how it works is it'll generate like a 4x4 area, 16 levels, and then it will randomly pick what type of room. They have a bunch of like presets. I don't know exactly what they are, just because I haven't played the game. But it has like, okay, this room is going to have like 2 exits. This room has 4 exits. This room has X, Y, Z, and those are the different types. So once it chooses the types, then it will place all of the important things. So in this case, it places the start, where the player starts, as well as the exit. And then after it does that, then it will make sure there's a path leading to that point, just so that the level is completable, like the player doesn't just get stuck. And if you can, I don't know if you can see it. You can kind of see it on this projector just because the lighting is goofed on that one. But there are some like red highlights in the background just kind of displaying like which way the player can move. But it knows which way the exits are, so that it knows it's completable. And then once it does that, then it just kind of like fills everything else in to make it so it's a fully fledged level. So there are multiple ways the player can go. The player can go this way, can go left, even though they should go to the right, but they don't know that until they reach the end of the level. Yeah, this way is a little more structured. It also does take use of some landmarks, just like Minecraft Dungeons does as well. If you'll notice in the top left, there's like a giant statue. And that's not going to be in every room. That's just another small like landmark thing, just so players can know where they're at. What kind of procedural generation does Don't Starve use? I should have made the green one right in retrospect. Yeah, it uses rapidly exploring random trees, which I'll talk about in a minute. Voronoi shapes, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Voronoi. I'll talk about those as well. And again, with Perlin noise. Perlin noise could be used for a game kind of like this, but it would be way more complicated, I think, than using the random trees. So yeah, Don't Starve, if you've played the game before, it's a top-down, well, not really top-down, but it's kind of like a top-down game. You have a flat 2D map, but it has no height, no up and down. You just run around, and there are different biomes which have different mobs and stuff. So this uses randomly exploring random trees. Basically what that does is it starts with a point, and then it will keep branching. It'll keep making different branches randomly. It just picks a point and it makes a line. And it keeps doing that over and over until it reaches like a certain set number or something based on, you know, whatever the programmer wants to do. And that's how you kind of get this shape where you have a starting point and then you have a bunch of plateaus that come out in each direction, as well as the paths. Like you can kind of see, this is probably where they were, the original lines that are over there, because there are paths that are going in and out. But then from there, then they just pad it, you know, add a little bit extra land on each side. And it's kind of good for a game like this. As far as I know, this is probably the only game that uses a method somewhat like this. But it does create that island feel, as well as creating different, like you have to explore all the way down one way, and it kind of fits into the gameplay a lot better as well, just because you can't run out of a bad biome or something. You know, if it starts to turn nighttime and you're way down here, you don't have anywhere else to go, you have to go back. So. What part of Borderlands is procedurally generated? Which I think I talked about earlier, so. Yep, it's the weapons, which I said earlier, so you're welcome. Yeah, actually, that would be really cool if somebody did that, but that would be crazy to program as well. So yeah, Borderlands, I just kind of grouped it all into Borderlands because I'm pretty sure they all have the same system. I think that's their like driving point of the games. But they make procedural weapons. So this is going to be a little different from creating an island or something. And typically or at least how I envision they would do it, is they have set features and set models that are like each part of a weapon, like the scope or the muzzle or something. And then they have a bunch of parts, and then throughout the game, whenever a bad guy dies or something, it'll drop it and it'll pick a bunch of things and just kind of throw it all together. And yeah, some of the weapons in the game are static for storytelling purposes. You know, you complete a certain mission and they'll give you, I forget what the name of the weapon is, but there's like one weapon that shoots like 11 bullets all in a line or something. That's only going to happen once. That's not randomly generated. That's just only when you complete that mission. But there is one problem that they kind of fixed with this, is that you could just randomly generate, you know, you could get a really broken, overpowered weapon at one point in the game, which, you know, as a player, that's really awesome, but it also kind of ruins your experience because it makes the game too easy. And how they fix that is by having a leveling up system. So the weapon never levels up, just the player. So eventually that weapon is not going to do as much damage as the new weapons that you're gathering. Just so if you get a really broken, you know, all the right cards came together and you have this really awesome weapon, you know, an hour down the road when you're like 10 levels up, it's not going to matter. That weapon's going to be obsolete. So these are just some examples. If you Google Borderlands weapons, you get a ton of screenshots of people being like, "Oh, I got this really overpowered weapon," but like, you know, it really doesn't matter because, like I said, eventually you're going to level up past that point. But yeah, if you can see all these different stats, they're all generated. There is some procedures to it, so it's not going to totally lopside it. It does try to, I think, even things out, just so like one weapon isn't completely unusable that you get. And then each rarity as well, like legendary level compared to epic or rare or whatever, that'll also change. One thing Borderlands also does is it has different manufacturers. So each manufacturer has a different like template, I want to say, of how each weapon is made. Some manufacturers, like I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head, but like one of them, for example, it just focuses on doing lots of damage, whereas another one, it does slightly less damage, but it has more elemental, so it has like fire to it or something where it burns the enemy that you shoot. And then those kind of also play into how those weapons are generated. So last question. What does SPORE not use procedural generation for? This game's a little older, so... The correct answer is textures. I thought this was shocking when I looked it up, but the game actually uses procedural generation to make music. So they have set sounds and set strums of instruments and stuff that will follow some sort of algorithm that they made within the game that changes music based on the planet you're on, the tribe that you're looking at, or whatever. It's been a hot minute since I've actually played this game, but. Yeah, it's definitely something that makes this game unique. So SPORE has pretty much everything is randomly generated in this game of some sort. Everything from the planet that you're on to the creatures that you see to the music, which just kind of displays like the possibilities that can come from this. This game was wildly popular, I know, for quite some time. I haven't heard anybody play it recently, so if somebody in here still plays it, good on you. But one thing that came with that is players can customize things. That's not necessarily procedural generation, but just something that sets this game out. And this provides like almost unlimited replay value. They have an online thing on their website that also shows like every creature that people have made and uploaded. It's pretty crazy. There's a lot of stuff, and they're all completely unique just because they've all been generated randomly. I think there might be some repeats in there, but here's just an example of one of the character creators. But how the game works is it'll generate random things, and then you're able to breed them together and modify them as well. So there is more. There's tons of games that use procedural generation. Here's the Wikipedia page for it. There's just a list of them. It doesn't include every game that uses it because there are a lot of Minecraft clones, for example, that are not on this list because they don't need to be. But this list includes every game that has a different form of procedural generation of some sort. So Minecraft is in there, but no other games like it. Don't Starve is in there because it's like the first, probably the only game that uses their method of procedural generation. But if you're ever interested in learning different ways, if you see a game in there you've played before and you want to learn about it, I definitely recommend checking this out. So, all right, one last thing is some technical things. So if you ever want to make procedural generation, from my experience, this is the best way to do it. There's a library called Fast Noise Lite that some guy or person has made. See if it lets me open it. Okay, well, I guess not. But it's a GitHub page. It's free to use. It has all of the following languages on there. So if you're using Unity, Unreal, almost any of the engines that use any of those languages, you're able to basically just go to the GitHub page, and it's all in one document. You just copy and paste it into your project, and you're good to go. It also has support for GLSL and HLSL, which are for shaders, which makes it really nice for if you want to do some crazy visual effects that are randomly generated as well. Makes it really cool. The nice thing about it, though, is the GUI tool that they have. So let me pull that up. So they provide a tool, and this makes it really easy to help visualize things if you choose to use this library. It allows you just to play around, kind of like a sandbox. You can choose different types of noise, and it'll automatically update it in front of you, as well as different things. So these are all settings that you can set when you use the library. So say that you're trying to look to make biomes for your game or something. How you would do that is, oops, that's probably fine. You could use Voronoi, shapes. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think I am. But this is generally kind of how it would work because you can use certain noise settings, and then you can kind of see it right here. Like each different shade would be a different type of biome. So if you were to get an XY position, like here, for example, it would return a value of 0.57 or something. And then if you do a black spot, it would be like 0.05. And then you can use that to help determine what type of biome you're in or something like that. But if you're doing something like a hill, you'd use open simplex. So this is the same situation. The white colors is like kind of a higher number, closer to 1 or whatever the scale is, and then darker would be closer to, I think, -1. And then you can use that to generate hills. So you can kind of see it right here. There's a lot more math that goes into it with making them look more than just, you know, ups and downs, but this is a good starting point. And it makes it really easy to help kind of visualize that before you have to mess around with it making a game. So just some food for thought. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know. This is something really fun. If you ever want to do this for like a game jam or something, it's something I definitely recommend. Procedural generation that can also include like infinite runners is probably one that I totally missed for some reason. But that also uses some sort of, well, they can use some sort of procedural aspect to it. It could just be entirely random, but you could also have like different branches or something to make it more crazy. But yeah, it's something you can totally pick up in a game jam, and it would also increase the scale of the project by quite a bit. Just because, you know, you can make it have it generate hills forever and ever, and then you'd have a giant world, and you'd only spend a couple hours on it. So once again, I have a couple announcements. Again, the game jam, November 11th or 13th. That'll start at 7 p.m. on that Friday, and it'll be for that 48 hours, that whole weekend. I'm hoping to see everybody there. It'll be really fun. If you have any friends that want to participate, tell them to come. You don't have to stay the whole time. The only time you have to be there is the very end. We highly recommend you come to the beginning as well, because that's going to be like tell you the theme and stuff. You kind of need to know that. But if you want to leave for the middle, go home, whatever, it doesn't matter. Otherwise, we will be there the whole time. You're able to stay in Ellings, I believe Ellings 308. Yeah, we'll be in Ellings 308. If you want to know where that is, you can ask me or just look on the map or something. But we'll have that room rented out the whole time. So if you want to stay all night till 5 in the morning, go for it. I'll be there. So okay, go forth, make games, and be awesome. Thanks for coming, guys.